Hey YouTube, what's up? Scarecrow here, and I am here today to do a deck profile for you guys on my OTT Witch deck. So let's get started. First, I'll mention this deck is very cheap to make, especially this build, and that's not like intentional. This build wasn't like constructed with the intent of being like cost efficient. It just happens to be very cheap. So if you want to make a pretty decent deck and spend very little money, you can. This deck is not the best option as far as OTT-wise go, but if you're like new to the game, kind of like the playstyle of OTT, you can make this deck very cheap. So, and it's a pretty good deck. It's pretty fun to play, I guess. So, getting started. Starting Vanguard, like every other clan, it doesn't really matter whether you use this for the rabbit. For the triggers, we're doing 8 crit. Now, this is where things are going to get a little weird. I'm sure some of you won't like this, but try to be open-minded here. So, we have our 2 PG draws, followed by 2 regular draws, and 4 heals. Now, let's talk about this. This is not for a lack of want. I definitely have 4 PGs if I wanted to play them. So, why is this a thing? So, this deck draws lots of cards and has the ability to produce protect markers outside of you can just ride to get perfect guards, and you have a card in the deck that makes perfect guards. With all the draw power, the grade 3s, and cards that make PGs, it can get kind of redundant where you have more PGs than you actually need. I've been messing around and actually like this lineup where I'm running these. Now, you might be asking, what's the benefit? Well, you might actually be forgetting this has shield. It actually has 5k shield. So you can actually guard with this to block like small attacks, or you can guard with it in a crit to guard for like 20. And that lets you hold on to your grade 2s in your hand. Which often, anyone who plays standard knows sometimes you just want to guard for 5, but you have a grade 2 you need for your offense next turn. And if you guard with it, you won't have that. And if you guard with a grade 1 or a crit, you're overguarding. So, I know this sounds weird, and I'm sure some of you are just going to write it off and think this is dumb, but as you hear me saying, there is some logic to this. So, feel free to try it. It's been working pretty good so far, actually. For grade 1s, first we got Mike of Elegance. So this card, if you pay attention to my decks, you'll be noticing ever since this card came out, this card is in all of my OTT decks. And that's because it's really good at helping the decks be consistent. On your first turn, you can ride her, resolve her skill first, Soulblast, look at your top 5 to get the grade 3 you want, or get a grade 3 that you need in general, because you don't have one yet, and stack it to the top, then resolve your starter skill and draw that grade 3. So, as a first turn ride, it helps you get a grade 3 you need, or get the grade 3 you need. Outside of that, you can still use it past the ride phase, call it to rear guard, if you still really need to get a grade 3. You can still use this to get it, put it on top, either attack and drive check it, or use one of your rear guard skills to draw it. It also gets +2 and comes to 10k. Next is our 4 Witch grade 1. She is pretty cool. When you ride a grade 3 Witch, you can Soulblast and call her from the soul. So This deck has a lower grade 1 count than other decks. It has 12 grade 1s, and that's not really an issue in terms of having grade 1s for boosters, because this card just recruits itself to the rear guard, so you can get grade 1s pretty easily in this deck without actually having to like play them. Her other skill is when she boosts an attack and it hits, you counterblast, put her in the soul, and draw. So you can use her as a booster, and when it hits, you can move that on-field offense you had to the soul, draw a card so you convert it back to defense. And because she's in your soul, next time you ride a grade 3, you could just call her back out again. So she puts offense on the field, converts back to defense, and then she can jump back out for offense again and do it again. Pretty cool, actually. And the last grade 1 of the lineup is for Folly Magus. So this deck does a lot of counterblasting, and I didn't want to put Tetra Magus in here. Cure Magus is... This deck doesn't do a ton of stacking, so I didn't find Cure Magus very helpful, because I'm just looking at the top 2, and that's typically not helping that much in this build. But I found for Folly Magus here to be pretty helpful, because as I said, this deck draws a lot, but it doesn't have really any trigger manipulation. It can't scry, and this card does that. So for the grade 2s, first we got our Witch grade 3 PP. When she's attacking, or not when she's attacking, when it's your turn, she has +2 as long as you got 4 cards in hand, which is like all the time. So she's a 10k, but she's an 8k on their turn, which does suck a little bit when you have to ride her. Even when she's on rear guard, she's an easy target, like a grade 1 could just attack her. But when you ride on top of her with a witch, you can counterblast draw. So you can ride her turn 2, and then turn 3 ride and draw off her effect. And after that, she's a 10k rear guard. Then the next grade 2, we have 4 Promise Daughter. She's our 15k beat stick that can't be retired. At this point, I think everyone knows how good this card is in OTT. It's a good card. Beat stick that can't get retired by card skills. Next, we got 3 Silent Tom. Silent Tom is pretty cool in this deck, because this deck has the ability to give a really big buff to the front row, and Tom has a guard restrict built into him, so buffing him up is pretty hard to deal with, because normal units can't guard him, so your opponent can't guard with their 2s and their 1s. But normally that's not that big of a deal, because the opponent just guards with like a trigger. But if you buff him up really big, sometimes the opponent would normally be able to just guard with like a trigger and throw down like a 2 or a 1. But because of his skill, it makes it really awkward, and now they're just gonna have to like burn 2 triggers to block him. So, and then our last grade 2, we are playing 2 Battle Sister Tort. As I said, this deck draws lots, so it keeps big hand and easy to keep her effect active. And second, this deck buffs its front row a lot. So a card that is 18 by itself with a crit and then buffing it even more, that's pretty good. For the grade 3s, we got our 4 Coco. When you ride her from a 2, you draw, so you can ride her on top of Pi or PP, whatever her name is. Draw off her skill, then draw off Coco's skill, and so after that point, when you have grade 3s in Soul, like when you've rode her a second time, you can counterblast, Soulblast a grade 3, and then you can draw 2 cards, and then you're allowed to convert any number of witches in your hand into protects. So, like I was saying earlier, it's kind of redundant sometimes to have like a card like this, grade 3s that make protects, and 4 PGs in the deck, in the form of draws. So that explains that. And you don't use that skill like every time. It does set you up for your other card in the game though, and like if you just are playing against like force decks and stuff, you're like, why not? I'm just gonna PG all their attacks. Let's do it. So she's a pretty cool card. And then this is like the more finisher of the deck, Zuzu. When she attacks, you reveal any number of protects, and then your front row gets +5 for every protect you revealed. So she is where you put in the big power moves. I would say it's pretty easy once you go under to have like 3, 4 protects, something like that. And then that means she's giving your front row +20. And there's not really a cost to it. It's just when she's attacking, you're showing them you have protects, which you already knew you had because they're protects, and your front row is just getting huge. So like, let's say you had 4 protects and you have 10 cards in hand. That means she's going to make your tort here a 8 + 10, which is 18, plus another 20, 38. Plus, say it's an 8k boost, 46. Let's say you get 1 trigger, so 56 with a crit. If it was another crit, that's 2 crits. Your Silent Tom. Even if you don't use his counterblast skill to give him the +6, if you just team it with a 8k, that's 17, and you give him 20, so that's 37. Give him a trigger, it's 47, and they'll only be allowed to guard with their zeros. So yeah, it's pretty strong once you go into the Zuzu turns. So yeah, that covers the deck. Thank you for watching. Hope you found it cool.